Hey everyone, my name is Ben Chaish, and today we're going to talk about the most expensive zoom lens that I have ever used, and the lens that I feel like I was most wrong about when I first used it. And that, as Leica puts it, is the Leica Vario Elmarit SL 24-90 f2.8 to f4 aspherical lens. For a quick background and disclaimer, this camera and lens were sent to me by KEH Camera. I do not get to keep them. I'm sending them back tomorrow, which is why I'm making like 1,000 videos today on all of the stuff that I've been using. But I will say that I've used this lens before on the original Leica SL, and I've been using it for the last like month or so, a little over a month since I've had this gear with me. And so because of that, this stuff is getting sent back and will be in stock soon at KEH, I would assume. So if you're interested in picking up the Leica SL2 or the 24-90 and want a significant discount over new, this actual camera and this actual lens will be available for purchase on the KEH site pretty soon. So this lens, like just about everything Leica, is not cheap. At the time of making this video, the lens brand new is $5,595, which definitely makes it the most expensive lens that I have ever used. That being said, it has some really cool features that a lot of other lenses don't have. And so despite the fact that it costs significantly more than a lot of the other, 24-70 style lenses, I feel like after using it for a month or so in a different capacity than I had used it before, there is definitely a use case for this that I had completely overlooked the first time I used it. So in a zoom lens, again, most of those zoom lenses are either a 24 or a 28, and most of them go to about 70. And the brilliant thing about this lens is clearly it goes all the way to 90. It doesn't seem like the difference between 75 or like 70 and 90 is significant, especially on a body like the SL2, where you can definitely, crop in and do a lot of work there. But that being said, depending on what you're using it for, those extra millimeters, those extra 20 or so, could legitimately be the difference between the shot you want and the shot you don't want. As a wedding photographer, I can definitely say that the times that I've used a 75 have significantly been different from the times I used a 90. And that little extra reach in that range is something that, for me, is significant enough that, at least if I was using this in a wedding setting, the difference would be warranted for sure in not needing to pull out a separate lens to get that longer focal length. Now, you could definitely make the argument that your money could be better spent buying the Leica Vario Elmarit 24-70 SL instead of the 24-90. But if you're interested in that, one of my favorite YouTube channels is the Red Dot Forum Camera Talk channel, Red Dot Camera Talk, I believe. They are a couple of guys that sit in front of a background like this and have the entire slew of everything Leica in front of them. And so they do weekly live videos where they talk about all this stuff. And they did an entire video when the 24-70 came out, kind of going over the pros and cons between the two. And as a giant Leica nerd, I definitely watched the entire thing. So if you want a comparison between this lens and that lens, you can definitely jump over there because they make a lot of really good use cases as to why you would want either one. So to complete my thought a second ago, you could definitely make the case that you could also, instead of buying this lens, you could buy a 24-70 and then a 90 SL, which would then give you a much lower aperture at 90. So instead of f4, you would be at f2, which could definitely be very, very useful. But depending on your use case, maybe you want everything in one lens and not two. So all that to say, that's kind of my thoughts on, why you might want a 24-90 over a 24-70. Now, I forgot to actually add the lens hood to this camera, which I guess if impressiveness is what you're going for, maybe that is a good thing. But I personally just think that this lens hood is absolutely absurd. And it's probably optically exactly what this camera needs because Leica is really good with that kind of stuff. But I mean, I think part of the reason why the first time I used this lens that I didn't like it was because it was paired with the SL, which I wasn't that big of a fan of. And then the lens is huge. I'm used to Leica M cameras and glass. And then the fact that the lens hood is just so big, like, I guess I didn't understand it. And I think it made me feel like the camera and lens were even bigger than it really was. That being said, if I was, photographing landscapes or going on some sort of big wilderness adventure, I would definitely use this. But the times that I have been using this, I have definitely used it without the hood because, again, I feel like it's kind of ridiculous. But for the sake of, remembering that it exists, we'll leave it on the table for now. So one of the things I've just never been a big fan of is the variable aperture zoom. As someone who wants to keep their settings fairly consistent, having a variable aperture then changes the amount of light you're getting, which then means you have to change your shutter speed or you have to change your ISO. And one of the things that, I don't know if this is a new update or they've had it for a long time, but the SL2 has sort of solved this in many ways with what it calls a float ISO. So in the menu, you literally just turn float ISO on, and then with a variable zoom, you can see that on the top, while I'm both running out of batteries and there's no card there, you can see as the aperture changes, as we zoom, the ISO also changes to compensate for that, which leaves us with the same shutter speed, which I think is brilliant. So I definitely think that having the ability to have that floating ISO kind of solves a lot of the annoyances that I had with this lens in the first place. The other thing is, for a lens of this size, I do wish that there was a way that I could get 2.8 through the entire range all the way to 90, especially at the price point of like $5,600 or whatever. So definitely a con for me there, but I understand that the engineering would probably make this lens even larger to accommodate that and more expensive. So I understand the rationale behind not doing it, but just for my own personal preferences, that would be, I don't know, helpful and appreciated. But one of the things that was most disappointing in that was when shooting in L-Log, that setting is completely taken away. So it doesn't give you the ability in log to kind of shift that. I get why they didn't do it because it can't just be stepless and go straight through. If you're, like let's say zooming or something, you're not going to get a smooth exposure through the range. But I do wish it was technically an option, maybe with a warning or something, because let's say I'm shooting at 24 and then I'm switching to 90. Then I have to manually go in and change the ISO up a stop. So I would say in a firmware update, having some sort of the ability to stay with that floating ISO, knowing that it's gonna look like garbage as you zoom. Because one of the things that I did when I started just kind of getting annoyed of that being the case is I simply just switched the entire range to f4. And then that made this whole thing for video just be much, much easier. But then it took away the ability for me to use 2.8, which an f4 lens I would assume would be a little bit smaller too. So if they made a 24-90 f4 or 24-105 like most other companies have, it would be, hopefully smaller than this lens. So we're kind of playing off a few different things here. And while it's not the end of the world, it was definitely an annoyance that I thought I'd toss out there. Now, one of the things that is beautiful about this lens, but you don't actually really get a lot of because, it's a very minimal setup here. You simply have the kind of traditional Leica focal lengths of 24, 28, 35, 50, 75, and 90, which as someone who uses the M system, I definitely love. But since it's so minimal, the only thing you see here are the focal lengths. And so one of the misconceptions is that I don't think that a lot of people know that this lens has image stabilization in the lens, which then paired with the in-body image stabilization on the SL2 or the SL2S, gives you a very, very stable image that makes it really, really easy to use for video handheld. Which then gets us into kind of my primary use for this. As a wedding photographer, I prefer the ability to shoot at shallower depth of fields, have more light to keep my ISO down further. And at weddings with movement, you know, you do actually have to use often a shallower depth of field to get the shutter speed you're looking for, while traditionally a 24-90 for a lot of people would be a fantastic wedding lens. And honestly, I could definitely bring this lens and photograph an entire wedding with it. Even if I stuck from 28, 35, 50, 90, those are all the focal lengths I bring anyway. So I could definitely use this and only this for a wedding, and I'm sure be very, very happy with it. And again, for landscapes, for commercial work, for all sorts of other things like that, I do think this is a fantastic lens. But the thing that I loved using it the most for was video. I felt like the image out of it was fantastic with being sharp, and I don't know, it just like gives you that really kind of like everything that you would want in a Leica lens for video, in my opinion. I mostly used it on manual focus and then spent honestly a lot of time at 90 and then, you know, some time at 50. And I tried to just kind of stick with the focal lengths that I'm most used to. So a lot of time I was shooting at 24, sometimes at 35, sometimes at 50. But if I had the resources, I definitely do think that the 24-90 is absolutely fantastic for video. And again, if I was jumping into that system for this, it's probably the direction I would go. So overall, I do feel like this lens is fantastic. It probably warrants the price tag, at least within the Leica system. And for a lot of use cases, this combo, if you are willing to spend the money, would do you a lot of good and probably bring you a lot of joy for years to come. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this whole thing down below. Obviously, this combo here is well over $15,000 just for the camera and the lens. But that being said, these are actually owned by KEH currently, and you could own them yourself. And this is not a sponsored video. They did let me borrow these, but at the time of this video going out, the likelihood of these being in stock and these actual items being able to go out to you is probably fairly significant. So I will definitely put links down below. And then if you are interested in this whole system, I made a video about packing the SL2S and the M system and the Q system all in a bag for a wedding that you can check out here. You can subscribe to the channel here if you aren't already. Join my Patreon if you want to support me and learn more. And then again, check out one of these videos and I will see you on one of those.